So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the welcome. It's really great to be here. And I have to warn you beforehand, before even I say my name, that this talk is going to be really experimental and controversial. So please don't throw rotten tomatoes at us, and rather just ask questions or discuss things. So, but first, let's allow us to introduce ourselves.
Yes, I'm Wilhelm. I'm working as a web developer at Zeitgeist and doing 100% Neos there, and it's awesome. Also, I joined the Neos team in January this year. I'm a proud minion now, and that's awesome as well.
And my name is Dmitri, not Dimitri, but just Dmitri. And I work in St. Philaret's Christian Institute in Moscow. I'm a Christian person myself, and I really have to thank God for working with really great people. And this is my main inspiration for doing Neos stuff, is to care for our developers. And they really love Neos, so they sent me to coding sprints, to inspiring conferences, stuff like that. Yeah, all because of them. So I would now let Wilhelm do his really rocket science kind of part of the talk. Be prepared, listen carefully, because we are going to need it actually in practice. So don't worry if there are some things that you are not really getting at once, because it's really sometimes hard for me as well.
If we are encountering web projects, if we start web projects, we all face a tough decision in the beginning. Because either the thing you have there is a web application that at some point will need content editing, or you have a website that has application-specific requirements. So deciding between these two things means a lot for your technical stack you can choose afterwards. You maybe want to use React for complete client-side rendering if you have an application. But if you use that, you might lose some features of the Neos backend, like inline editing. We don't want that. So how to close that? And to approach that problem, we look at the beginning. And the beginning is, like with every problem in the world, communication. In, let's call it prehistoric web, we had something called RPC. And from today's perspective, this really looks like Morse code, yeah? Keep your messages short and be precise, and don't expect a decent conversation with the other side without wasting a lot of time. And then a concept called REST was introduced, which translates to representational state transfer, and really is not another 100-page API standard, but rather a set of architectural principles, like stateless communication. You don't want to handle application state on your server if you have a single-page application. And a concept of resources, which is an abstraction for your data. The important thing about resources is that you need to address them uniquely, and we usually do that via URLs. And another important point for REST is to embrace HTTP for a unified interface. That means exactly that we don't have a couple of endpoints to describe our operations. We have a single endpoint identifying a resource and a couple of HTTP methods to operate on them. That means we use a GET request to retrieve data, a POST request to create it, PUT to modify it, and delete to remove it. You have really a set of very expressive methods and get an API for free. Another evolutionary stage of REST is hypermedia as the engine of application state, which is an awesome abbreviation right there. It starts with hate. It shouldn't, actually. It's quite a nice concept. It's about self-discovery of APIs. So with every response, you are delivering URLs to related resources, and it could go that far that you have a single endpoint to explore your entire API. So your client doesn't need to know every endpoint that's there. It can just navigate through your API like a user would do with a website. And the awesome thing is, Flow can handle REST perfectly. Flow has an HTTP framework in which you can just embrace HTTP in its entirety. Flow is a domain-driven design framework, so you have not a lot of abstraction for resources, and also Flow ships with a REST controller. That means you have already an interface that just implements a couple of CRUD operations for arbitrary resources. It is easy to do REST in Flow. REST comes with a few drawbacks, though. If you think about content and how it's organized in Neos, you don't want to really specify resource types and stuff like that, because content normally has a couple of types, and content schemas change a lot, and we do want them to change. You can compare this abstraction to the point why we do not store content in relational tables, but in the content repository. If you have REST, you also need to take care of breaking changes. If you have a couple of clients implementing your interface, you need to drag them with you. If you have breaking changes, you need to maintain your old implementation. So you need some kind of versioning concept behind it. And if it comes to hypermedia, we have a lot of requests to do, which can be handled via HTTP caching, but still is kind of bad for mobile clients, for example. Many REST APIs end up with implementing ad hoc endpoints because of performance reasons. So you just feed your views with exactly the data they need, which breaks REST in a way, and usually is a pain to implement. But in Neos, it's kind of easy, because you can use TypoScript for that. You just render your JSON response like you would do with a website, and it actually pretty works quite nicely. Dmitri has a nice example in his blog, and you should really check out his blog. It's pretty awesome. Has a lot of examples and articles that are really interesting. So now with REST, we do not have Morse code anymore. We have a telephone, and we can have decent conversations. But it still feels kind of wrong that we have to at first talk to the operator lady before we get connected to our peer. So isn't this the kind of communication we want today? At least it is the way we communicate. So how can we achieve that? Are there any alternatives to REST? And in Buzzword City, there has been a lot of buzz, obviously, lately about these two words. GraphQL by Facebook and Falcor by Netflix, who consider themselves actually alternatives to this concept. And since Facebook obviously is taking over web development, we are going to talk about GraphQL only. But that shouldn't keep you from looking into Falcor. It's a pretty awesome concept as well. So what is GraphQL? GraphQL actually is not an API. GraphQL is, like the name states, a query language. So the special point about it is that GraphQL queries are exactly shaped like the response you expect from the server. So you can be really expressive about what you want to get. That enables you to let actually the client decide about the contract. This is a GraphQL query, as it could look like for the content repository. I don't want to get into detail how all of this works, but I just want you to look at the shape of this, because it looks a little like JSON, right? And this is the actual response you would get. So it's pretty similar. You are very expressive about the data you get back. GraphQL solves a lot of the problems REST has, like the API versioning. You don't need that anymore, because your client decides about API. You obviously have much less requests, because you can just have a single request for all of your view hierarchy. And another thing is, GraphQL is backed by an application-specific data schema. That means you get strong typing and things like code completion for your queries, which is really an awesome thing to have. There are still problems with GraphQL. You don't get HTTP caching because GraphQL is agnostic about its protocol. If you use it with HTTP, everything is a post request, so no caching, obviously. Caching needs to be implemented on client side, and Facebook has a solution for that called Relay, but still it is kind of a drawback. And GraphQL is obviously not a standard, because Facebook doesn't care about standards. Facebook is implementing their own stuff all the time. If it just wouldn't be that awesome, but still a problem for us to depend on such concepts. So we looked into this, and having a query language to receive data from the content repository is actually a good idea. So we tried to find a concept to use that for Neos. So the content repository is really a very good and expressive way to store content. It is organized via node types. You can classify content. You can address it in a very meaningful way. And it is organized in a tree. Not just the documents, but everything is organized in a tree. And that is very intuitive. But it brings the problem of traversal. Traversal actually is a common problem and need to be solved for the server as well. And it is solved there. If we render a website with TypoScript, we use flow query to traverse through our content. So flow query is actually inspired by jQuery, a JavaScript library. So it seems intuitive to just take flow query and adopt it for the client. Because if the client understands flow query, and the server does it as well, you just need some kind of transport format to let both of them talk with each other. So why not just use a flow query subset? We implemented this, so it's actually already there. And this is how flow query on the client looks like. You really get a request and a syntax that looks similar to what you would do in TypoScript. And except for the fact that you don't get back an immediate result, but a promise. But actually, most of the client-side programmers do know how to handle that. And we introduced another flow query operation to reduce our result sets, so you can be explicit about what you want to get back. In this example, we just take a couple of blog posts and just want to have the titles. And this is what you would get back. So it's pretty simple. Flow query shares the problems with GraphQL. Everything is a post request. We have no HTTP caching. And it's obviously not a standard because flow query is very specific to Neos. But in the Neos context, this is not a problem, actually. Another problem is the number of requests. As it is now, we have to send a request for each and every flow query we are having. There are a couple of ideas to solve that, but it isn't solved yet. So we wanted to get here, and in my opinion, GraphQL comes pretty close to this, to modern communication. And having implemented the flow query approach, it seems a little like just having emojis to talk with each other, but this is still pretty expressive. And who knows, maybe emojis are the next step in the evolution of human communication. It seems a little like that. So I've talked a lot about API now, and Dmitri is going to show you what you can do with it.
Thank you, Wilhelm. Probably now you see why Wilhelm is actually our chief architect of the new front end. He's like really, really good at all of this stuff. Like probably 30% of this actually fits into my head. So if you are overwhelmed about all of this, it's okay, as I said before. And you know, this whole story started about a month ago on our previous code sprint. We were hacking with Wilhelm some Neos UI, and I saw this cool thing he implemented, the flow query. And I thought, wait a minute, perhaps it can help me to solve the thing which I've dreamed about since I got into JavaScript world, is to actually do rendering completely on the client side and let Neos handle the data and all the heavy lifting stuff. So what we are trying to solve here is to take our rendering stack and levitate it to the client, or at least decouple it, maybe put it on a Node.js server or something. But yeah, so this somehow resonates with the two-stack or decoupled CMS approach that was mentioned today in the earlier talks, but for completely different reasons. But we'll get to that. But the main benefit you get from this is that with this technology stack, you suddenly become like the most hipster developer among all of your peers, because like I didn't see like a lot of people doing it, actually rendering website content in JavaScript on the client. You would see that on single-page applications for a couple of years already. That's already mainstream. But doing it for rendering websites, it's like not really a common thing you would see. So yeah, you would beware. People would look at you like at this dog. So let's get an overview of what we are trying to do. We have a Neos content repository and a Neos UI and all of this stuff. We have a client who views our pages in a browser or maybe on mobile app, doesn't really matter. And we would have an intermediate Node.js server to take care of caching, of server-side rendering, and in React you can render on the server, and then when the client loads the page, even if he doesn't have JavaScript enabled, he would immediately see the completely rendered page. And when the JavaScript loads, the page comes to life and all the animations start working. So that's really great for like SEO, and that basically solves all the problem with single-page applications. But first things first, we need to actually know how to render things. We need a rendering engine. And currently we have like one of the most amazing rendering templating, declarative templating languages there are is TypoScript. And if you know me, I'm probably the biggest TypoScript groupie out there. I'm a big fan of all the people who've done the initial development of this concept, which was like 6 years ago. Seriously, this was the time long before stuff like React and all of these ideas of modularization and componentization, out-of-band rendering and everything. And these guys had it for 6 years already, and it's such a shame that not many people really appreciate the benefits of TypoScript. But there would be a different talk about this. Actually, I could convert this talk into a talk about TypoScript quite easily, but I don't want to steal the subject. So let's move on and just have a side-by-side comparison of rendering something really simple, like some person listing on a website. On the left side, you see this stuff done in TypoScript and in Fluid below. And on the right side, it's a React component. So I highlighted with color things like similar things. And you see that, indeed, they are similar. You have basically your HTML template on both sides, and you have mapping of your node data to actual template variables. And this is all pretty simple, and React can handle it well. And next, we have to iterate over data. And the really cool way to do that is to use TypoScript collection object. I haven't used for loop in my templates ever. No, only once, actually, because of the listable package where you need to do the listing, but doesn't matter. Anyways, TypoScript allows you to declaratively specify the iteration, how you iterate of your collection of data. And React does about the same. You see here's a map. You have your nodes, and you basically map over those nodes with your rendering object. And this is like exactly the same concept as item renderer and TypoScript. So it feels really natural switching to React rendering from TypoScript rendering, and I really don't regret, I would not regret switching completely for these very reasons, that TypoScript was like kind of like a prophetical thing. It was like 6 years before anything like this started to actually happen, which got things exactly right. I think it was like a big luck that we have TypoScript today in its form. And, but TypoScript has some advantages over React for rendering that are not possible to do easily in React, and most of them have to do with unplanned customization and unplanned extensibility. I'm really grateful that we had a great talk about separating these two things, because they are actually like really, really different things. If you do unplanned extensibility, you should like really, you know, feel kind of dirty and, you know, ashamed of what you're doing, but you just have to know the limits of this. And TypoScript can allow you to hack into any third-party extension and go deep into it and maybe modify some class down below somewhere that nobody planned that it should be customized by someone. And another cool feature of TypoScript is that it allows you to do like context-dependent rendering, where you can say that, for example, an image object should have like smaller size when it's within the grid, when it's rendered within the grid object. So this is really cool, but that is also kind of like not the best practice. It's like similar to doing nested CSS selectors. I don't know if any of you guys still do that, I mean, in CSS world. Because like modern best practices, like with BEM and with CSS modules and with all of that, is that you are trying to avoid overcomplicating your code by nesting things. And, but still, sometimes it's really a good fit for some use cases. And this power you don't get out of the box in React. There are ways to do that, and with Wilhelm we discussed them, but I'm not going to overload you with all of this information now. Hello? Flash? I don't need Flash. We are talking about React here. And this thing, seriously, this is an insult to a front-ender talk. When you see a Flash, can somebody do anything about this? What? Flash is chasing me. It ruined my career back in the years, and now it's there again. I mean, just uninstall it, please. It killed my slides. Oh no. So that we got this warning from Flash. Actually, Flash was trying to prevent me from showing you the advantages of React, and indeed, it has quite a lot of advantages. And at first of all, the components in React are usually pure functions, especially the presentational components. So you clearly see this separation, what goes into your component, what's your kind of like component API, the things you can configure, and what goes inside of it, like the inner works of your function, and what you return. So like in this example, we take the node object. We get like the name, age, and story properties from it. And we return like this JSX syntax of HTML. And another cool thing closely related to this one is that you can really nicely validate the input to your object in a declarative fashion. So you can say that name should be a string and it's required. Age is it's a number and it's an optional thing. Nobody wants to talk about the age in the front-end world. Yeah. And you can do the same things in PHP with I don't know, with conditions and stuff like that. But here you declare it. It's like declarative way of doing it. Next thing we need to solve is to actually how to get our data to the client out of Neos. And here we're going to need all of the knowledge that Wilhelm provided us. But first of all, I need to get one thing. When you are rendering your website in TypoScript, and when you are already using some kind of API to fetch data, and it's not only the front-end concern that you get, and you already have a powerful tool to iterate over tree structure of your content repository. You usually don't use content repository API to access data from there, to query data, because that would be a weird thing to do, right? Actually, the flow query was ported, not ported, it was inspired by jQuery on the client. So now we are giving back the same power to the client, and it was quite a natural thing to port flow query back to, not back, forward to JavaScript world. You do about the same thing with relay. You declare your data dependencies. No, I didn't say what relay is. Relay is kind of cherry on top of the GraphQL protocol. It allows you to specify the data dependencies of your components next to your components. So like we have this person object, we take it, and we say that it needs name, age, and story, but we don't say how to get them. We say it's a fragment, then relay does some really wizardy stuff and composes all of your data requirements into one request and provides all your view needs. So you see, it's all about declarative style of programming again. You declare the data you need. You don't imperatively fetch it. You don't write things like that. And you see, we can do, for example, in GraphQL, we can implement the whole flow query API or content repository API, for example. I know it is already implemented, but the person who implemented it doesn't want to do the Lightning talk, which he absolutely should do, because what he has done is actually much more cool than what we are showing here. But never mind, I can't force him to do that, unfortunately. The relay in GraphQL is a bit of an overkill for rendering just a simple one-pager Neos website. The flow query is a much more lightweight solution for such use cases. You see, we are doing the same things. We are declaring the properties for shape, flow query operation, and then we are using React Transmit, which is a clone of relay, but to work with promises. It allows us to, for example, to compose the promises tree that all of our components need. So it kind of gathers all the promises, constructs this tree, waits before the whole tree resolves. And this is important for server-side rendering, where you have to wait for all your promises to resolve to pass on the data to your client. And this actually works. This is an amazingly designed new demo site for Neos. I'm sorry for showing it before the time. No, this is not our new brand or anything. It's just something I hacked on overnight. It actually works, and there's a URL. You look at it in more details. It uses flow query to connect to your demo site installation of Neos, and it renders with React. All of these things are React components. We have what was item renderers before. Now they are React components like text, headline, a grid, and everything. And the whole page object is a React component as well. So this works. And it's really fun to work with it, I would tell you. I missed a lot of sleep because of this previous night, trying to finish that. And yeah, that was fun. But that would be not fair to say that there are only the bright sides here, because there are a lot of actually crazy challenges awaiting for you, and some are not so crazy, because you're basically on your own now if you're doing this kind of stuff. And here, the thing that you should not be concerned about now is security. Because Flow and Neos provide you with very fine-grained privileges. So if you don't want to expose part of your content repository to the client, you don't have to, or you can require authentication for that. So that's all just fine. Inline editing is not there yet, but it should be quite easy to do it. Because you have the node data, you can just render node annotations in with some React component or something, so that would work as well. Image resources are a bit of a challenge, that you can't let the client fetch any kind of dimensions, any kind of size of your images, because they would just spam the cache or spam the database with all of those variants. So we need to provide like presets or something for image sizes, but that's okay probably too. But the real big thing here is caching, because in TypoScript we have really strong caching layer that is flushed, or that you can configure on what occurrences the cache is invalidated. And you know that the cache invalidation is the hardest thing of all. So for small websites, for medium websites, you can just cache the whole thing, the whole page, and either flush the cache manually or implement the cache flush like on publish or something. So that's actually pretty easy to do. But hard thing to do would be to re-implement kind of content caching like you have on TypoScript level. But it's pretty possible to do it too, to get some signals from content repository when and what to flush. There are challenges, but yeah, we need to tackle them. And you would say that this looks similar to two-stack CMS approach. Indeed, it does. But for completely different reasons. Two-stack CMS are like the big guys who want to deliver their content on scale. And we are thinking about actually different things here about rendering on the client. But two-stack CMS approach, if these things are more developed than Neos itself, it would be easier to do what we are doing as well. So we are on the same page here again, although coming from completely different angles. So it's okay to feel lost. It's okay to say, like, what are you doing? And we are not sure ourselves, but something has to be done. Otherwise, we'd lag behind. And the quick benefits, I don't have like a lot of time to go through all of this. So probably if you're not bored of jQuery enough, that would be enough for you. You don't need to switch rendering of your websites to React. Like this is an example of the news site that I read that is done in React and that is heavily content-based. Yeah, that's where rendering such things in jQuery are possible, but that would be a mess, you know. And React allows you to solve these things, to do the declarative rendering and simplify things, increase developer happiness and so on. And this API, the API of this website is very chatty. Just for one switch of a view, you see it fetches dozens of requests. And these guys could seriously benefit from GraphQL. The developer happiness is a very important aspect, is that you have so many great tools when you're coming to React world. You have NPM with all the ecosystem. You got React ecosystem of components. You have all the tooling and, I don't know, live reload, whatnot. I mean, I'm completely sold on this being the front-end developer, and it's really, really hard to get back once you're into it. So you probably didn't get anything from all of this talk, and we don't have a lot of time for questions, I guess. Like to wrap up, the rendering on the client of content-based sites is possible. It's crazily fun. It brings crazy challenges. And you need to understand the content APIs to do that, and that's where you can refer to Wilhelm's part of the talk always. So what you're waiting for, try to do something, explore.